各位，美国面临最大的威胁并不来自于外部，而是来自于自身的行为。这是美国哥伦比亚大学经济学家、联合国常高级顾问萨克斯教授在一次公开演讲中给出的判断。问题不在于对手有多强，而在于权力是否已经脱离了规则在运行。而过去几年，美国的军费不断的膨胀，债务却没有换来相对的安全感。战争被包装成特别行动，轰炸成为有限的打击，威胁他国成为一种日常的语言，而使用武力的边界正在被反复的试探，直到模糊不清。而联合国并没有消失，但它正被绕开，规则依然存在，却被选择性忽视。制裁法官、退出机构、撕毁条约，这一些行为不再解释为例外，而是被公开作为立场的宣示。权力被视为唯一的语言，而法律被描述为障碍。问题在于这一套逻辑并不是别人强加给美国的，它是写于1945年，由美国主导制定，经美国参议院批准，本意就是避免世界再次滑入全面的战争。当威胁与轰炸被当作是外交的工具，这一套体系正在被内部掏空。而危险并不只是一次的军事行动本身，而是在于无法无天被公开化、被炫耀化。秘密行动曾经至少需要否认，而如今却被直接宣布出来。界限一旦消失，那么惯性就会接管决策。而更深层次的并非是某一位总统的性格，而是长期积累的结构性偏移。自冷战早期以来，战争逐渐绕开国会，情报系统被作为私人军队使用，合法性被替代为效率，而这一种状态持续多年，只是现在不再掩饰，而世界正在注视这一变化，不是以恐惧，而是以警示。美国退出国际体系并不会带来尊重，只会制造不确定性，而安全感没有随着军费的增长而增加，反而在持续的流失。当规则位于冲动，当权力不再约束，风险就不再是区域性的。中东、东欧、东亚这些高度军事化的空间彼此牵连，任何一次的误判都有可能会引发连锁的反应。这已经不是学术的讨论，也不是意识形态的分歧，而是关于集体生存的现实问题。至于是选择规则生活，还是只按照力量来行事，决定的不再是胜负，而是否能够避免下一次无法控制的灾难。让我们看一下视频。
It's just about the only thing that threatens the United States is our own behavior. So of course we don't need a budget of $1.5 trillion, especially because our government does nothing but hemorrhage debt. And we have a fiscal crisis. Aside from that, we don't need more wars. We have a president of the United States that threatens a new country every day. And this has to stop if we're going to survive. We're just on a completely reckless, dangerous, provocative path right now, the likes of which we've never seen. We've never had a foul-mouthed president who views himself as above the Constitution, above the domestic law, who dismisses any idea of international law, and who thinks that he reigns over the world and is determined to do so with the vast military spending and rampant use of the military. The United States has bombed 7 countries in the past year, getting to be a habit. No, nothing actually happened at the UN Security Council, but I think it's extremely important that we not just write off the United Nations. We have right now a government that is trying to rip up the UN Charter and rip up any semblance of rules and standards and norms and laws and treaties. And if we just go along with that because we're cynical and we side with the extraordinarily dangerous statements of Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, that the only thing that counts in this world is power, well, then we're basically saying we're just going to war with the world. And the consequences absolutely will be devastating. And since we have a reckless, intemperate, impulsive, corrupt president, it's very dangerous. It's extraordinary. I would like to give him a start of what international law is. It is the UN Charter, which is a treaty ratified by the United States Senate in 1945.
And written by the United States.
Happens to be the creation of the greatest president in American history, Franklin Roosevelt. And it was to prevent another world war. It said that the world had suffered the scourge of two wars in the first 45 years of the 20th century, and the UN Charter was an agreement among nations to prevent the scourge of war being revisited. Now we have a president who is bombing countries at will out of his imagination or his so-called morality, and threatening other countries every day. The threat of force is against international law. Under the UN Charter, Article 2, Section 4 says that no UN member state may threaten or use force against the sovereignty or the territorial integrity of another nation. So President Trump should learn what international law is. He should understand that in the US Constitution, when we enter a treaty, that treaty is the law of the land. He should understand that 192 other countries have entered that same treaty, have adopted the UN Charter, are members of the United Nations, and for very serious reasons of our collective survival. We've decided to live according to rules rather than according to power alone, so that we don't destroy ourselves. That's the idea of law, rather than the kind of brutality that we're hearing from Trump or from his minions right now, Miller or Hegseth or Rubio, who are trash talking the world and making threats. Now, this isn't idle. This isn't academic, what we're talking about. We've had a genocide in the last couple of years because we're not abiding by international law. And when international courts under the UN system say that these crimes are being committed, the United States is sanctioning the judges, the individuals, even the families of the judges in these courts. We're trying to break any kind of constraint using international law because Trump, in his delusional world, thinks America can do what it wants without consequence. So we have ineptitude, incompetence, and arrogance all built together in our system. I do think it's very important for people to understand it's not just Trump. We lost our constitutional order years ago. It's been fading gradually, but presidents, one after another, have engaged in so-called covert operations, which means you go to war, but you deny it, even if it's quite obvious. You overthrow governments, but you deny it. You confiscate property, but you don't own up to it. And so this has been going on really since the founding of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947. And it was already in 1961 that none other than General Dwight D. Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, our most illustrious general, who was the supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II, told us in his farewell message that we are being taken over by the military-industrial complex. That was no idle chit-chat. That was telling us that our Constitution has been profoundly subverted. Took a general to tell us that. And he was telling us how things have actually gone down. Only once was the CIA ever investigated, and that was in 1975, 50 years ago, by Senator Church of Idaho. Since then, not again. And so we live in a state of illegality. The difference with Trump is two things. One, he says out loud the illegality and he boasts about it. Second, he opens the floodgates to more illegality, both on a personal sleaze level and on a violence level. So this is the difference, but it's a difference of magnitude, let's say, because President Obama and President Bush and presidents, most of them all the way down the line, have used the CIA as a private army, have committed wars that are under our Constitution, the decision of the United States Congress, have violated international law. That doesn't mean it should be so ruthlessly torn to shreds as Trump is explicitly trying to do this week, because even if we have sinned and sinned again, it doesn't mean that you rip up every standard. It means you try to get back to the kind of behavior that can actually make the world safe, rather than the kind of world that we're in, which is becoming ever more dangerous for the American people and for the rest of the world because of this general lawlessness. Now Trump is boasting of the lawlessness. And we should mention that from the time I was in the UN Security Council at the beginning of this week, Trump has pulled out of, I think it's 31 UN agencies and organizations and another 35 or so international activities that are not counted under the UN rubric. In other words, Trump is destroying the basis of applying international law, which is the UN system, and he's pulling the United States out of that. And I think it will get worse. Probably he'll announce one day that the United States isn't part of the UN at all. I have to emphasize, I'm, as you say, halfway around the world, and I'm on an extended trip meeting senior government officials and leaders in different parts of the world, now in Asia. The rest of the world is aghast. The rest of the world is shocked. The rest of the world is dismayed. They don't like to see the United States become a rogue nation. The U.S. isn't earning respect. It's not gaining security. It's not winning its resources and wars. It's sowing instability, but without support anywhere. People watch what's happening with great alarm, and that's true everywhere in the world. It always recalls the statement that President Putin made in an interview in a French newspaper in 2017, when he said at that point that he had dealt with 3 U.S. presidents. They come into office with ideas. Then the men in the gray suits and the blue ties come to tell them about the world the way that it is. Well, Trump may have come into office a year ago with the idea that he would make peace with Russia and end the Ukraine war. But Project Ukraine, which has been a CIA-led project to take Ukraine for the West, proved to be rather durable. Trump proved to be incompetent there, as in so many other areas. The war rages on. And I don't think that the Russians have much confidence. Ships are being seized. The high seas it has become an area of U.S. piracy. Attacks are made inside Russia on the president's residence and so forth. This is absolutely shocking. It should be shocking. Nothing shocking anymore for us. And Trump has recently said, I'm out of the country, so I don't know all the details, but apparently has said, sure, let's go on with even more punitive sanctions against the Russians and so forth. So I think that they're quite, and then Trump says, if you address that unrest, if you crack down on it, we're going to go to war with you. So it's a game. This is a game that goes back decades. Crush the economy, provoke unrest. If the unrest then provokes a crackdown, then you try to overthrow the government that makes the crackdown in the name of protecting the people. It's the oldest game in the U.S. playbook. I think that this is very close to what's happening right now in Iran, and extremely dangerous, because Iran, unlike Venezuela, is in the midst of the great powers. Many nuclear powers are all around that region. And it's not like Venezuela, where the president cynically, ruthlessly amasses U.S. vessels all alone. It's a heavily armed region. Iran itself is a heavily armed country. It's surrounded by heavily armed countries. It's a powder keg. And it seems like, because of Israel, which is the other rogue nation on the planet, it seems like we're going to be provoked to do something there as well.